Big Podcast.
It's the marketing podcast for podcasters. Build a Big Podcast. David Hooper with you, bigpodcast.com. That's the website. This is the audio edition of my weekly newsletter. That is called Big Podcast Insider. If you want to follow along, subscribe. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Everything that I talk about as far as links, that's where to go, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. On this episode, Spotify Wrapped is back. Louder than a riot. Tips for starting a podcast. Louder than the riot is the show. But maybe what's going to happen when you start the podcast? Sonic Dash audio competition, January 5th through 7th. Scam alert! I just got suckered to be a guest on a podcast for $3,000. Want to start a podcast? Read this first. Or, in this case, listen up. If Wrapped for Podcasters was honest. Also some classified ads, things that I think will help you to grow your podcast, build a bigger audience, spread your message, and make money. This episode is brought to you by Riverside.fm, the leading platform to record studio quality remote podcasts and video. You know who uses Riverside.fm? Spotify. The guys that are everywhere this week with their wrapped graphics. And they're not the only ones. 70,000 people and companies use Riverside.fm. It records locally on each participant's computer, uploads the audio to the cloud, allowing you to have the highest quality audio and video for each person speaking. Different tracks. You're going to be able to manipulate these files any way you want and make them sound even better. And the best thing is, it's easy to use. Not just for you, because you know what you're doing, but for your guests. That's one of the worst parts of podcasting. You got a great guest, got a great message, but that guest has no idea how to get something recorded. Well, it's not a problem with Riverside.fm. Send the link. It opens up in the Chrome browser. It puts you and your guest immediately in the Riverside studio. No additional software to download. One click, and you are in the studio and recording great audio. You want to check it out? You can do it for free. They're going to give you a couple of hours. That's enough for you to get an interview, maybe 2 interviews. Go to riverside.fm, sign up for a free account, check it out. When you find out how great you sound, you want to stick around, this is the discount code. Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST, riverside.fm, the discount code, Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. You've been here before. You know how this works. I'm going to go from thing to thing to thing, all those things that I mentioned earlier in this episode. And in between those things, you're going to hear this sound. If you're following along at newsletter.bigpodcast.com, that's how you know when to turn the page. You want to hear how it works? Here we go. Spotify Wrapped is back. Everybody and his brother is sharing Spotify Wrapped graphics right now, which means it's a great opportunity for you to join in existing conversations about Wrapped and about your podcast. Spotify has a special Wrapped for Podcasters edition. It's made just for your podcast, and they're going to make your podcast sound great. Listen to what they said about this one. In 2023, I had an increase of 170% as far as listeners, an increase of 215% as far as streams, a 54% increase in followers, and as far as minutes created, 26% more minutes created this year than last. So they're not going to get all up in your business. They're going to make you sound great. You had 1 listener, you got 2 listeners. Hey, 100% increase. I got the link for you to get the custom graphic. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Louder than a riot. Tips for starting a podcast. This podcast, Louder Than a Riot. This is a great podcast. I wasn't really into the first season, but the second season, man, they got me. They got me. And here's what was interesting about it. In the middle of that second season, NPR dropped them. Going to get into that in a second. Let's talk what it's about. What happens when hip-hop stars come into contact with the criminal justice system? That's just one of the topics that Louder Than a Riot looked at. These are the kind of people going in the trenches, having deep conversations, the kind of thing that gets attention, it gets listeners, it gets people talking. If you're looking to make impact with your message, if you're looking to get sponsorship because you've got something that people are talking about, this is a good template. These are the kind of guys that you want to listen to. And they've got some great tips for starting a podcast. I've got it linked. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Listen to the final quote. I have friends who have done long-form narration shows in their spare time with a producer, a host, and an editor. And that's it. It just really depends on how scrappy you want to be. I mentioned that this podcast was on NPR. And you've heard the credits on NPR. This podcast produced by this person, hosted by this person, the dog was walked by this person, the dog was groomed by this person, catering for the dog was done by this person. A lot of credits on an NPR podcast. You might think these hosts, they've got it easy. Just show up talking to the mic. All the work is done for them by other people. All the promotion is done by other people. The distribution, a few hundred radio stations blasting their stuff out. Easy. That's not necessarily the case. And how do you get the attention of NPR? You got to do it, man. You got to do it. You're not going to get the heat before you put the wood in. I pulled that quote, though, because it wasn't just talk for these guys. As I mentioned, in the middle of the second season, NPR pulls them. I don't know why. Cutbacks at NPR, maybe the ratings weren't there. Who knows? Who knows? But the people working on Louder Than a Riot, I'm talking about the host, the production staff, they were so dedicated to it, they finished it themselves. If you want to link to Louder Than a Riot, their podcast, and also their tips for starting a podcast yourself, I've got it at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Sonic Dash Audio Competition. This is January 5th through 7th. I'm so glad that this is happening. For the last 10 years, there's been something called Radio Race. KCRW out of Santa Monica did it. And it works like a 24-hour film festival. Noon on Saturday, they give you a prompt. The prompt for last year was secrets. Noon on Sunday, 24 hours later, you turn in a 4-minute piece. This is an NPR station. If you wanted an easy way to get on NPR, I mean, easy as far as you're connected to NPR, you still got to do the work, produce a piece that they're going to want to run. That was a good way to do it. But they didn't do it this year. So picking up the slack, the Sonic Dash Audio Competition. This is going to work a little bit differently. If you enter the competition, you're going to receive a prompt via email. That's the same. But that prompt comes in on a Friday, and you have until Sunday. So this is a 48-hour competition, not just 24 hours. You've got to create the audio piece from scratch, and it needs to run 2 minutes or less. 2 minutes? How do you tell a story in 2 minutes? That's the rub. You got to have that beginning, that middle, and end within a couple minutes. It's almost like being a songwriter. I think songwriting, advertising, 30-second ads, I think memes, infographics, getting a message out with not a lot of real estate to work with, that takes skill. It's easy to write a long book. It's easy to do a long podcast. You see these guys doing these podcasts 3 or 4 hours. It's not Costco, man. I want to see the guys that can get to the message and get to the message quickly. If you're one of those people, you're going to love the Sonic Dash Audio Competition. I've got it linked. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. If you do this, I want to know about it. I will play it here on Build a Big Podcast. I will help you get the word out about what you create. Having done Radio Race in the past, I can tell you it's a great experience. I've met some good people doing Radio Race and competitions like it. Because you're in the trenches, man. You might not be directly working with somebody, but you're talking on social media. Hey, just got the prompt. What are you going to do with it? Helping each other out. I did a Zoom session last year, probably, 10 people. All right, guys, got the prompt. What are you going to do? We brainstormed. Everybody's helping each other out. Because to me, it's not about the competition. It's not about winning. It's about you coming up with a great piece. It's about other people coming up with a great piece. You're going to be a better podcast host, a better radio host, producer, journalist, however you identify yourself, by doing something like this. Sonic Dash Audio Competition. I've got everything linked. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Scam alert. I just got suckered to be a guest on a podcast for $3,000. This is not what you think that it is. There are a lot of people who charge to be on podcast. And there are a lot of people, probably more than you would think, that are actually paying to be on a podcast. It's an influencer scam. It's worth being aware of. The chances of something like this happening to you are very slim, but it's important for you to keep stories like this in mind for when we approach guests. That's why I want you to know about this. The more things like this happen to people, and the more this gets out into the world, and it affects our reputation as podcasters, people think the worst of us when we approach them. I think we're a long way from having the reputation of a Nigerian 419 scam, but it's something you might come up against with individuals. And because of that, information is power. Somewhat related, a few years ago, the television show Undercover Boss reached out to me. Of course, I didn't know it was Undercover Boss. The name of the company was Mom Productions. He told me they were working on an independent film. And I'm in Nashville. That had something to do with the story. They were following around a country singer who was trying to make it, maybe like a housewife or something like that. It was one of those stories. Like, she's got a dream and she's going to make it. And we're looking for somebody to interview her. And I said, all right, cool. I've got access to the radio station that I produce out of. I've got access to other radio stations. I'm blocks away from Music Row. There are literally dozens of studios that I've got access to. Let's make it happen. And that was the first red flag for me. They go, no. We've got a house and then they named a suburb. And we're just going to do it there. I said, okay. At that point, I wasn't interested because I wasn't going to be in some random living room interviewing somebody, It's like, I've got a reputation, man. If you're going to put me in the film, have the production crew there, let's do it in the studio, man. So I passed it on to a friend of mine. So my friend does it. I ask her about it. She's like, yeah, it's weird. They had me on a Blue Yeti, but the Blue Yeti wasn't even plugged in. I was like, okay. I mean, I can kind of understand that because they're going for a visual and they want the audio for the visual. They don't need the actual podcast audio, but it didn't sound like a professional setup. I don't know. It seemed like a facade. That was another reason I wasn't really interested in. I don't want to play with people's dreams, man. I was in the music industry a long time, and that situation of somebody who's trying to make it and she had kids and she thinks time has passed her by, that's a common situation. I don't want to be portrayed as somebody who is trying to maybe cash in on that kind of person or try to take advantage of somebody's vulnerability and dreams. Anyway, my friend did it. We didn't think much of it after that until a couple months later. She said, hey, remember that thing that I did? I was like, yeah. In the house in the suburbs with the fake mic that wasn't even plugged in? She's like, yeah. It was Undercover Boss. And the person I was interviewing was Jewel. I said, what? Really? I'm sure it's on YouTube if you want to check it out. Jewel in a house in the suburbs pretending to be on a podcast, but she's got fake teeth and a wig and a lot of makeup. That's what my friend said. She said, yeah, this lady walked in. She had a ton of makeup. I just figured she was from the Midwest or something. You've probably seen that show over the years. They did several seasons of it. And you think, are these guys idiots? Do they not know that this is Undercover Boss? And by the way, if you're not familiar with this show, this is where the president of the company will come in and work the drive-through of a restaurant or something. And it's the same deal, prosthetic nose, fake teeth, makeup, so you don't recognize that it's the president of the company. But it seems a little weird because there's a film crew following you around. You would think that people would be onto this by now, but nope, Mom Productions, they're out doing it. I'm curious if you've ever been conned online. Let me know. I'm on Mastodon, Blue Sky, and Threads. I want the links to how that scam goes down and how it works. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. You want to start a podcast? Listen up. Use these prompts and quick tips to get your creative process started. What is the idea? No, really, what is it? Some people jump into podcasting, they've got no idea. They think, well, it will emerge, and it will emerge, but it's not even as clear as that. They don't even have the parameters. Oh, man, I'm just going to get together with my friends. We just like Doritos, man. We're going to talk about the best flavor of Doritos. That sounds more like a conversation to me, not really a podcast. Not something somebody's going to want to listen in on, unless you work for Doritos and it's a focus group. That's a very limited audience. Is a podcast the best format for this, and why? Podcasting is not the best format for everything. If you've got something that's really heavy on visuals, probably not the best format. But if you've got something where you're great at telling stories and you can bring the mind into it through your words, probably so. A lot of people argue, oh, YouTube, man, the discovery is there. But sometimes YouTube takes away from something. Yeah, the discovery's there, but you're there with a billion other videos and you got a talking head video that's not visually interesting. In that case, that visual is taking away from your audio. I'm in a 5x8 closet, man. It's not exactly exciting to look at. It's cool. I got some gear, blinky lights, that whole thing. But it's not really exciting to look at. This whole podcast would be me talking about 3 inches from a mic and a bunch of gear with blinky lights. Not that interesting. What do I want to accomplish? I talked to a guy one time, and this is pretty common for me. I've been self-employed about 25 years. And I'll have people that want to do self-employment. They want to work for themselves. And this guy wanted to do that. Man, I just want to be my own boss. Any idea what you want to do? Man, I just want to be my own boss. What do you want to accomplish? What's the goal of what you're doing? Because there are ways of being your own boss without working for yourself. And there are ways of being heard, making money, having impact, having authority without doing a podcast. So is a podcast the best format for this? What makes this distinctive from other similar podcasts? Me and my friends, oh man, we're hilarious. Johnny likes to get high on pills, drink a lot. Man, we like to smoke cigars, drink bourbon. Okay, yeah, you and everybody else. That's not distinctive. What makes your podcast distinctive? In some ways, yeah, you, but are you even distinctive? I had a guy who was interested in Big Podcast AMP, which is audio monetization program. Bigpodcast.com/AMP if you're interested in this. And I'm pretty clear if you listen to the last couple of episodes that I'm not interested in rage farming. People who are just trying to make other people mad with their content. For example, bringing somebody who we'd say maybe isn't sophisticated, maybe somebody from the country, not really educated on ways of the city, and then making fun of that person, or vice versa. It's like me going on an agriculture podcast and they'd ask me questions. I'm like, I don't know. And they're just making fun of me. I'm not interested in something like that. So this guy was asking me, he said, hey, I've got this content and I'm like these type of journalists. And he mentioned broadcasters and journalists that have opinions. The people you would see on Fox News, MSNBC, maybe Howard Stern. He said, do you think that this is rage farming? He didn't want to make the wrong decision. And I said, no. I want you to have an opinion. You need to have an opinion. The world does not need another milquetoast podcast. That takes it back to the question, what makes this distinctive from other similar podcasts? Yeah, it's you, but you need to fly your flag. You need to have an opinion. None of this hooray for everything, trying to be liked by everybody. No, man. No, you shouldn't be liked by everybody. Some people should be annoyed by you. Some people should say, nope, this is not for me. Let them go find something that is for them. Not everybody's going to like what you do. You look at the top movies of all time, the top music of all time. A lot of people don't like it. Number one album, Thriller by Michael Jackson. Do you like it? I love it. I think it's amazing. I didn't always like it. When it came out, I was like, no. Of course, I was about 10 years old and I was too metal for that. Now I appreciate it. But you're not going to like everything. You're not going to like every song on it. Same for your podcast. That's the point. How passionate am I about this story and concept? This is work, man. Right now, I've got about 32 minutes of tape. Big Podcast Supercomputer, give me an update.
This is the Big Podcast Supercomputer with a courtesy time check. We are 17 minutes and 40 seconds into the current episode. Approximately 55% of the raw tape has been removed.
That's a lot of editing. Plus, I had to write it, plan it, episode notes. It is a lot of work to do a podcast, so you've got to have some kind of passion to be able to drive all that. Why am I the right person to make this podcast? As far as this podcast, Build a Big Podcast, I started radio in 91. I was a freshman at the University of Memphis. Had no plans to be in radio. I just wanted to play my own music because I was in a band and I thought you could do that. Yeah, man, they'll just let me in, just play my own music. That's the equivalent of what a lot of podcasters do. Well, I'm involved. Surely everybody's going to be interested. No. I've been podcasting since 2005. I've done thousands of episodes, hundreds of interviews. That's why I'm the person to make this podcast. I'm in the trenches with you, and I've been in the trenches for a number of years. You've got your version of that. Why are you the right person to make your podcast? Do I have the people, time, and resources to make this? Do you know people? Are you willing to go and meet people? That 30-something minutes of tape that I mentioned, are you willing to edit that? Are you able to record it? It takes time to do a podcast. Here's the bottom line. Don't just throw spaghetti at the wall. You need to be intentional. I've got a full list of questions to ask yourself before jumping in. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That is where to go. I talked about Big Podcast AMP, audio monetization program. If you got a podcast, you're looking to tighten it up, bigpodcast.com/AMP. If Wrapped for podcasters was honest, I've been talking about Spotify Wrapped. Everybody's talking about Spotify Wrapped this week. You really need to go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com to see this. I've got some fake Wrapped graphics. And this one says, in 2023, your total podcast production time was 40,844 minutes. That's more time than people spent listening to your podcast. That speaks to the last thing that I was talking about. It takes a lot of time to get a podcast out. Hopefully not that much more time. In all seriousness, Spotify Wrapped is honest, but depending on your market, it may not show the full picture of how well your podcast is doing. That is because not everybody listens to podcasts on Spotify, and there are certain demographics. They are way underrepresented on Spotify. Spotify is a music-first platform. Most people, especially listeners who are 25 and older, they do not listen to podcasts on Spotify. Spotify is not a very good podcasting platform. I don't think it's a stretch to say that it's kind of awful. It needs a lot of work. The reason Spotify has podcasts at all, and I know they've got some exclusive content that they're trying to bring people over into Spotify, but they're not even doing that anymore. Yes, they've got content that they pay for. Call Her Daddy, for example. But they're not doing the exclusive distribution that they were. They're opening it up because they're finding the exclusive distribution doesn't work. Why? Spotify is a music-first platform. The reason they got into podcasting, they don't have to pay royalties on podcasts, and that's your podcast and my podcast, not Call Her Daddy. And they do have to pay royalties on music. I think there's an opportunity with Spotify right now, basically because everybody else has neglected Android. Google Podcasts is going away. Android is up in the air. People need a place to go for Android. So if you want to get more listeners on Spotify, you've got an opportunity. These guys are looking for a way to do podcast, even if it's not the best way to do podcast. I've got a mobile-friendly subscription page. It's linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Feel free to steal it. I'm sending all my Android people to Spotify now, simply because it's the best, arguably the only place for Android users to go. Everything's linked. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Classified ads for you. Swell AI automates writing podcast summaries, articles, social posts, and more. You can manage multiple shows in one dashboard, build custom templates for each show. It connects with Google Drive, Dropbox, and Zoom, vacuums up your audio, spits out a transcript, and not only that, episode notes. You can try it for free. Feel the power of automation and AI. Swell AI. It is linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Speaking of AI, Audio Pen, the easiest way to convert messy thoughts into clear text. I'm talking about you talking into your phone. I think I want to podcast about this, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Ramble on, Led Zeppelin, and then let Audio Pen turn that into a great outline for you to take action on. It's a very powerful tool. There's a free version. You can find it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast. If you want more, you want to work with me, make the new year even better than this year was, let's make that happen for you and your podcast. Let's build your authority, build your audience, make you more money, spread your message. It's called Audio Monetization Program. You can find it at bigpodcast.com/amp. It is cheaper than you think, and you will personally work with me. bigpodcast.com/amp. If you want to subscribe to Build a Big Podcast, make sure you never miss an episode. This is how to do it. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I've got 3 buttons for you. One for Android. Where does it go? Spotify. One for iPhone. That goes to Apple Podcast. And another button that's an RSS feed for you, because I know you old school podcasters, you love RSS feeds. It's not a podcast if it doesn't have an RSS feed. All right, man. I got you. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Go there right now. Pick one of these 3 buttons. I've also got a QR code. You can scan it. You're going to feel like you're living in the future. You scan this on your phone. Your phone sucks down the latest episodes of Build a Big Podcast, processes them, sends them out through earbuds that you can hear with your very own ears. Everything's at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Go there now before you forget, and I'll see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.